then they have Jennifer's body in their apartment, right? So then there's that whole aspect of how do you get rid of that? And I don't think most people are capable of doing that. I know we've all seen it, on The Sopranos, and you break things up and you put them in bags and you drop them all over the city and stuff. But I don't know that I could do that.
It is really hard to get rid of an adult human being.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to True Crime Unsolved. This is the place where we tackle the stories that the TV networks won't touch. All right, everybody. Today we got another comment reaction video for you guys. Before we get into it, I did want to let you guys all know that we do have something in the works for Halloween that's going to be a little bit special, a little bit different. We're going to change our format a little bit and not necessarily be interviewing people, but dive deep into some stuff that might be apropos for the season.
We've been tossing ideas around for this for a while. It seems like you guys have a pretty good reaction when we do try new things. So we're going to continue doing it until we run into a wall where we make something where you guys are like, please don't try that again, then we'll back off. So far, so good, though. And, Halloween is a very mysterious and spooky time of year and holiday. And we thought it would be nice to take a break from our normal format and try something cool for you. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And when I say fun, I mean it'll involve murder and all the stuff that everybody here is fascinated with. So don't despair. We're not turning to sports or movie reviews or anything
Like
like
the
that.
top 10 most spooky sports bloopers.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's still gonna be in our true crime vein.
Yes.
Um, so let's get into the comments. Yeah. The first comment that we've got is actually on the Jennifer Kesse suspect video that we posted for you guys. A lot of reactions to that. So, like Sean said, we'll probably do more stuff like that in the future where we dive a little bit deeper after posting our interviews and stuff. So this first comment's from Christopher 74-K3E. Think about this, guys. The suspect in the video, his clothes did not have blood on them. They're not torn or anything else. If he had just committed the crime, she would have been fighting for her life. Look at the time Jennifer went missing and the time he dropped the car off. So look at his clothes. Love the coverage you guys are doing on our case. Keep up the fantastic work. Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate that. It's an interesting comment. I mean, I guess there's a couple of things to say about that, right? There's the idea that, like, was this person alone? Is that the only person that was involved? Is that just the person that was dealing with the car? Um, Also, if they had been with Jennifer and they had done the worst to her, then something had to be done with what was left, right? So other stuff happened. So, the idea of like changing clothes could certainly fit in there. I know what you're saying as far as like the time and that there's not that much time there, but I do think there's a couple of things to consider that could nullify the idea that since this person doesn't have obvious signs of struggle or blood on them, that means that it's not someone who was involved in Jennifer's disappearance. What do you think,
Well,
Sean?
yeah, I mean, I think they obviously were one way or the other because they parked her car and wiped it down. So they somehow were involved. I think the big question for this person seems to be what a lot of people are saying is, are they just the person who was responsible for moving the car and somebody else did something to Jennifer? That's possible. We even talked to Drew and Joyce, her parents, about that, and they threw that out there as a possibility as well. I will say the clothes being clean, it's worth noting, right? Like it doesn't seem like this guy's white shirt is covered in blood or torn to rags, which would indicate if there was some sort of a real fight and a real struggle, or if he did something to Jennifer that was super violent, you would expect to maybe see it on him. But because we don't know exactly where she was taken, what happened, it's totally conceivable that this guy brought up an extra pair of clothes. As well as also it was a team of people and this guy wasn't involved in the violent part. He just moved the car. I think those
Right.
are both on the table. But I will tell you, I've seen a lot of cases where they will later find like a trash bag filled with the murder clothes, right? And the guy's got the gloves, a lot of times the weapon and whatever they wore to commit the actual crime, kind of bundled up and tossed somewhere where they're hoping nobody will find it. So people do that. And I think that from what we can know of Jennifer's disappearance, it feels like this was pretty planned out. Somebody was waiting for her that morning, whether it was in front of her apartment door or at her car. they were waiting for her. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. And so if there's that level of planning, why not the next level, right? Where they realize there's probably going to be a struggle. They might want to pack an extra pair of clothes and find a way not only to dispose of Jennifer and her car, but potentially what they were wearing if there was a weapon involved, all of that as well. So that's my read on that. I think it's really worth, pointing out and it's interesting, but I can see what some different explanations might be to explain it.
Yeah, I think it only adds to the frustration, right? Because if as that figure walks through that frame, you could see clearly like tears in their clothes and blood, be like, okay, at least we know that there was a bloody struggle and that something then obviously did happen to Jennifer that we can define and say, look, that's the sign of something, right? And the fact that we don't see that only adds to the frustration in this case.
The idea that this person parked her car and wiped it down and then just walked off, it gives to me a certain level of like songfreud or just cold-bloodedness to this whole thing where it feels like they were so prepared. They knew exactly where they were going to take that car. They were prepared to wipe down prints, get rid of any evidence, and then they just strolled off, never to be seen again. And that's really chilling because if you imagine someone who just attacked her because it was like a crime of opportunity, and then they were kind of freaked out and had to figure out where to get rid of a human being and what to do about the car, you'd start to imagine there'd be some mistakes in there just because like imagine your emotional state if you just attack somebody and it goes wrong and you kill them or something and now you've got to solve this problem. And this person just doesn't seem like that to me. I mean, we have so few images of them, but from what we know, it just feels like spooky how cold-blooded and well planned out the whole thing was.
KG Penguin. KG Penguin's back. One of my favorite usernames. I wonder if AI could tell us the height of the man who parked her car since the police couldn't. If so, it may narrow down the three suspects, Chino, the ex-boyfriend, and the coworker, depending on how different their heights are. That is assuming the person who parked the car is the one who abducted her. If the attorney is correct and the suspect solicited outside help, then maybe the person who parked the car wasn't the abductor. So, a couple of things to get into here, right? I'm going to start backwards. So, if the attorney is correct, Paul Cisco, and the suspect solicited outside help, then maybe the person who parked the car wasn't the abductor. Absolutely. And I think that goes back to what we were just talking about with Christopher's comment about the clothing and, there's no signs of struggle or blood or anything like that. Absolutely. And it seems like then there would have been a plan, right? Or that was somebody had a really good friend or a relative that they were able to just call up and say, hey, this is that call,
Mhm.
and this person was willing to do it. So yeah, the idea of more than one person being involved, I think, is a good one, and I tend to lean that way myself. Um, as far as AI and it being able to explain it, KG, I don't know if you're referring to what we mentioned in our initial case breakdown and then in the follow-up interview with the Kessies, but from our understanding, what we have read and what we have heard is that that is being looked into. So they are looking into that technology to see if they can sort of like fill in those blanks, right? Fill in those gaps in the images, which is really, really exciting. So yeah, that would be fantastic and would at least, as you said, be able to narrow down the people that have been looked at and that, obviously are still suspects since nothing's been figured out with this one. I will say, and Sean, if you don't want this in, we can always edit it out. But we have been speaking to the main investigator on this case for months, going back to before us even recording our initial interview with Drew and Joyce. And they were extremely bullish on being involved. We had some great phone conversations. And what's happened there is that they have not been given permission to speak with us on camera about the case. What that tells us, in our experience, is that that means that something's happening with this case.
Yeah, and I will say, one other piece of context clue that we could plug into that whole thing is that we know this case was officially designated no longer cold the summer of this year. So you couple that with the inability to get the investigator on camera to talk about it, and you have to wonder maybe something's about to happen here. We may be finally, after all these years, circling the person responsible or the people responsible. And it would make a lot of sense for them to want to keep quiet while they do their work, you know, and we respect that. We get it. I mean, we're not like paparazzi, but for police where we want to bother them and, you know, trap them and wait for them outside the airport to get comments. Like that's not who Miles and I are. And, you know, it's great to talk off the record, but if people can't talk on the record, we respect the reasoning. And honestly, in this case, it seems like it's probably for a really good reason. So we're going to stay on top of it. And I'm curious to see how this plays out too. As far as the AI thing, I agree with Miles. You know, I think this is something that people are using for everything these days. So why not this? It seems very well within the capabilities of AI to sort of look at a still frame and, you know, figure out how tall somebody is in that frame, especially with foreground references and stuff that we have in these images.
If we don't get that interview until the case is solved, and then we're interviewing the cop who actually was able to break the case here for you guys, I'm ready and willing to wait for that to happen. You want to take this next one?
Sure. Glenda Cox, 6540, says, I think all of the stated theories are way too complicated. This is still about the Jennifer Kesse suspects video, by the way. I think all the stated theories are way too complicated. Keeping it simple, he had to move the car to divert attention. I think it was a resident that was infatuated with her, may even have spoken hello to her and she to him. I think she was killed in his apartment. I think he used a weapon to quietly move her along to that apartment. I think he kidnapped her as she left her door and turned to lock it. Right. The one thing I can't figure out is what he did with her precious body. He had plenty of time because everyone was looking at the car and that neighborhood and looking at the workers and the janitors in that building, overlooking the white guy in a button down shirt. I love this podcast and the voice it gives to the families of the victims. Well, thank you for the compliment at the end. We really appreciate that. And yeah, it's awesome to give voice to these people. We love doing it. So, it's an interesting theory, and it's one that hasn't come up a lot on our show yet, is the idea that somebody maybe who was in that building that wasn't a maintenance worker or a janitor or a housemaid may have caught her not at her car, but as she was locking her door. And then rather than like have some sort of physical fight with her there, used a weapon or a threat of some sort to move her to another location where whatever took place took place. It's interesting. And I think you know, you're not onto a bad track there. It's really hard to say because there's no evidence that I've seen as far as people in that, you know, residents in that building being interviewed or their apartments being searched. I'm not even sure that that happened. I would think you'd have to get a warrant, you'd have to have probable cause. And it just doesn't sound like, from what Miles and I have heard, any of the residents got to that level with the investigators. But it's also possible that that did happen and it's buried somewhere in the police files that, you know, we just haven't seen and are not publicly available. So, yeah, I mean, Miles, what do you make of that? It's definitely an interesting theory.
I don't know who this white guy in a button-down shirt is. I don't know, Glenda, if that's referring to someone specifically that you know was living in the building or perhaps was interviewed. I'd be curious to know more about that if there is someone specific or if you're just you sort of like saying like, someone who was able to afford this place and was
Sort of flew
Jennifer's
under the
neighbor.
radar while everyone's looking at the workers, right?
Right, right. And I understand it from that perspective. Like, you have Chino and you have the transient worker guys, and then you have the white guy in the button-down shirt. But the ex-boyfriend was also a white guy in a button-down shirt, right? Maybe he was wearing a polo shirt because it was the weekend, but so
Right.
I don't know. It's funny because Glenda, you say that the stated theories are too complicated, but then you give like a pretty detailed breakdown of how a neighbor could have done it, which is not simple. I mean, it's simpler, I guess, because they don't leave the property, but then they have Jennifer's body in their apartment, right? So then there's that whole aspect of how do you get rid of that? And I don't think most people are capable of doing that. I know we've all seen it, on The Sopranos and stuff like that, where you break things up and you put them in bags and you drop them all over the city and stuff. But I don't know that I could do that.
And it is really hard to get rid of an adult human being, like Miles said. I mean, like,
Yeah. I mean, look what just happened with that rapper, who, had the teenage girl in the back of his car. I mean,
yeah.
how long was he driving around with her?
You know what sticks out as maybe a good part of this theory, though, that could fit in with other versions is the fact that somebody maybe used a gun to get her to comply, which would explain kind of what we talked about in that other comment, the lack of blood on the shirt, the lack of signs of a struggle on the suspect that we see in the video. It could be that there wasn't very much of a physical struggle. It could be that this was all done at a distance. She was kidnapped and taken somewhere, and I don't know what happens at that point. But the fact that, like, I think a lot of us tend to picture Jennifer's being attacked in a parking lot and there's a struggle. And we do see on the car those sort of like drag marks on the hood that look like maybe that had something to do with her being taken or some kind of a struggle. But it's also possible that there wasn't as much of a struggle as we think if the person had coerced her with a gun or something like that into thinking that she'd be okay if she just listened to their instructions until she wasn't. So I don't know. That part does stick out to me as plausible.
Absolutely. And even the neighbor idea, I just don't know about like just slipping into the apartment and then what? That's the only thing that I'm really bumping on with it, Glenda. But again, thanks for the comment.
Thanks for a
Thanks for
comment
watching.
that brings up something we haven't really talked about before. So that's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So actually, replying to Glenda's comment is X broken, X dreams, X. He abducted her at the car because number one, no one was around early in the morning, and number two, he didn't have his own vehicle because he was young and or poor. He drove her to the total control zone, did his thing, then dropped the car off a mile away so he wouldn't get caught pulling up in her vehicle back at the condos. He could walk back and avoid police if they were there. Obviously, it's someone who lived or worked at the complex. I'd like to see the police report. It would be pretty disgusting if they treated illegal immigrants like some sort of privileged class and didn't do a proper investigation interrogation. As far as the workers who might have been undocumented getting treated differently, that's we haven't heard anything like that. In fact, what we've heard is that, it was just hard to track people by the time that they started putting together the interviews with the parents, finding out about the catcalling, you know, figuring out that there were all these workers there, the skeleton keys, access to the building, all the things that we've covered in the past. It was all about that sort of contamination period, right? From when her car is discovered to when the police actually start investigating it in earnest. And Sean, how many days do we have there? Because the Kessies get involved right away, want the police to get involved, but they're kind of told like, well, she's young, whatever, whatever. I've heard it before. Then the
Mhm.
car shows up. What is it?
2 days later, just so yeah, there's 2 whole days there where somebody could have hidden evidence or otherwise obstructed this investigation, and we wouldn't know. The
Right.
cops get involved when the car is found and it's wiped clean.
Right.
Now they know
And by the
something's really
time
wrong.
those 2 days pass, if there's chatter going around and it is something to do with one of these guys who's working there, they're gone, and then that the issue becomes how do you find somebody if there isn't proper paperwork and they're being paid under the table. I had off the books jobs when I was a kid, and I'm a multi generational American, and I think that's just like there's certain industries that just are like that, and it makes things hard to track down. And I think that was the big problem with this. Um, what about the rest of what Broken Dreams said, Sean?
Yeah, well, I'm really drawn to the fact that they kind of just said what I said prior to this, which means we maybe I should have read this one first, but they're talking about moving her elsewhere
Mm.
to a total control zone, right? So the previous commenter was saying like that place could have been the resident's apartment where they took Jennifer to have total control over her. This person's saying no, they got her in the parking lot, somehow got her in a car and took her elsewhere where they felt like they had control, whether that's some out of the way swamp or some other building, whatever it is. And then whatever happened to Jennifer happened there. So, yeah, I mean, again, I kind of just said that I thought that was a possibility. So I'm going to just double down on it and say I think you could be right here. The idea that the fight that we expect to happen in that garage might not have been as violent at that point as it later got is really striking to me. And it does kind of plug in and answer some of these other questions.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I understand why you're saying that it was obviously someone who lived or worked at the complex, because that does make the most sense, especially with what we know with the scent dog that came back and found that they actually came back to the building. We've talked about that before. I mean, it's quite possible that if it was the ex-boyfriend or someone along those lines that they came back just to check up on things, but you would think that someone wouldn't want to come back to the scene of the crime, right? But a lot of us know, people often do. happens a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I had raised in the last comment reaction video, it could have been that they lived there, it could have been that they worked there, or it could simply be that they parked their car there. Or during whatever happened during abducting Jennifer, they dropped something that they had to go back and get. There could be a couple reasons for it. But
Yeah,
I am also drawn, like you guys are, because we keep seeing this, to the idea that it was someone who was really intimately involved in that place, whether they were a worker or just familiar with it or had been there before or even lived there like Jennifer. It does kind of feel that way, right?
absolutely.
This is Zach Sestaro. I think I recognize that name. I think he's commented a couple times. Hi, Zach.
Isaac.
So he's saying, think about it like this: MS-13, they're known to work in cheap labor along with Mexican cartels. This was definitely planned. I 100% agree with Joyce's theory. I'm not a cop or investigator at this time, but based on OSINT and other research I've been doing and studying about in this field, boys, this was definitely something like that along those lines. As always, I'm more than willing and happy to help you and the Kessie family. Well, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, so the Joyce's theory that I think Zach's referencing here is the idea that maybe somebody owed a debt, right? Either to a cartel or a gang or some sort of like a coyote who maybe got them into the country. And the debt was paid for with Jennifer, right? Instead of like, I'm going to give you money or I'm going to smuggle drugs for you, I will obtain this human being for trafficking purposes. And that was Jennifer's fate. So yeah, Zach's saying he believes that and or at least believes that it's possible. So yeah, I mean, look, there's a reason Joyce brought it up. I think that if it was really that far-fetched, Jennifer's own parents wouldn't be entertaining it. It is one of those things that I think we've talked about a little bit before being even crazier now because now we've got a big conspiracy going on. There's more than one person or more than two people involved. It's actually like there's almost a ledger someone's keeping, and this guy owes me that. If you bring me one pretty young woman from Florida, I'll erase that debt. And then she's handed off, and it's just very complicated. So I'm not saying that can't happen or that wouldn't happen, but I always kind of go for like the simplest explanation first and then work my way out from there as I'm able to like cross it off. And look, not that I'm a homicide detective. I've just interviewed enough of them that like I've started to think like that a little bit. But I don't think that's impossible. Certainly, it's nothing we can rule out at all. I mean, until we figure this out, that's 100% on the table. And when
Yeah.
you look at Jennifer, I hate to say it, but it does sort of it's understandable, right? She's a beautiful young woman. If we're talking about human trafficking, that's the target, most often. So, yeah, I mean, I can totally see this theory.
Ruru 8392 says, my money's on Chino. You and like 75% of what I've seen on Reddit.
Yeah.
And that's not to put down your comment. It's a lot of people have eyes for Chino and have for a long time, obviously, including that housekeeper who fingered him and said that, look, it's the same haircut. He's the guy in the video. So yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to Chino's ability to stand there at the door on camera and face down that reporter and not run. Not everybody would have done that, but
Yeah, but he does bear a striking resemblance to the guy on the video, so I understand why people say this. And then also, Chino later got in trouble for sexual assault. Now, granted, it was a non-violent one, from what I understand. It was like statutory rape, right? Not like an aggravated sexual assault or sexual battery, but still, it's worth mentioning. The guy didn't go on to become a Nobel Prize winner. He went on to go to prison for a sex crime. So, yeah, I get it. There's a reason Chino's in the video.
yeah, absolutely.
People have concerns.
Speaking of Chinos, Chino Smith E9 says, I'm not going to lie, my heart thumped hard when I heard my name in the intro, thinking you were mentioning my comment weeks ago about the bowl cut, but to hear one of the alleged suspects with my name gave me goosebumps. Sorry to do that to you, Chino.
What a day to
Um,
be named Chino, huh?
yeah, I do think we mentioned your bowl cut comment as well. But yeah, we're not, you're not the Chino we were looking for.
You're in the
So
clear.
yeah, rest easy. And thanks for the comment. James Lewis, 3975. Hey guys, another great video. You're smashing it out of the park. I'm from England, and when you get chance, because I know you are busy, I think you'd be interested in having a look at the Claudia Lawrence case. Very famous case in the UK. A lot of media about it, along with some really creepy CCTV, a bit similar to the Kessie case. All the best. Thanks, James. Amazing to hear that people are actually watching us internationally. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for the support. Thanks for the encouragement. We did take a look. I had actually never heard of this case. And Sean and I have been reading up about it a bit since we read your comment a couple of days ago. And yeah, it does look really, really interesting. Claudia looked like she had a very complex personal life, to say the least, and a lot of secrets. And what a fascinating case with tons of layers. So yeah, thanks for the heads up about that. I mean, I think we're gonna take a look at it and see what we can get into with it. I think we've mentioned this before, but we are pretty much programmed through to the end of the year of 2025. Like we've already got everything shot, and we're just doing these comment reaction videos and editing stuff right now, but we're already shooting stuff for next year, and we don't have a full slate for that yet. So we are looking at new cases. So yeah, thanks for this one, and please, guys, keep the suggestions coming. It's great, and we love the back and forth with you folks. Our old friend, I think there's a gas leak. Is there proof other than Jennifer's own words that a neighbor was at her door? There are a lot of pieces to this case, so forgive me if I missed it. Could it be possible that the individual who disappeared Jennifer was at her door? So there's like a lot of back and forth on this whole story that Jennifer was on the phone with Rob, her boyfriend, and there's a neighbor, and she says, "Oh, my neighbor's at the door." And when did that happen? Um, from what we've been able to see and from what we've been able to garner from like Drew's own words, not from our having a conversation directly with him about this, but uh, this conversation, from what I've been able to find, happened before Jennifer and Rob went on their vacation to St. Croix. That like the last words from Drew, from on the internet at least, is that it was a mistaken timeline, that this was the day before she disappeared. So which would have been the night she came back, right?
Mhm, mhm.
From the vacation. Um, so I think there's some misconceptions, and there's a bit of a telephone game about this neighbor at the door. And even if there's actual proof that she answered, which from what I understand, she didn't. And if it was a specific knock at her door, or if perhaps she heard her neighbor at their door, and Rob
Mhm.
said, "What's that?" And she was like, "Oh, it's my neighbor," because it was actually down the hall or something. There's a lot of possibilities with this, but I think what really matters is that, like I said, from going back and reading as much about this as we could without bothering Drew about it, it does seem like this actually happened before the vacation. So, you know, was there a neighbor that tried to talk to her before? I maybe, I don't know, but I think it's just as far as like that having happened like right before. I think there might be some telephone game on that. For the
Yeah.
second part, could it be possible that the individual who disappeared Jennifer was at her door? I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I think some of you other guys, we already talked about that. And Sean was saying, the whole idea of like them having a weapon, and that's how they got her to comply. I mean, all of that is absolutely possible. It's possible they got her at the car. It's possible they got her at the door.
Yeah. I did a little reading after I read this comment, as I know you did too, Miles. And it's somewhere, I think it was on Reddit, brought up an interesting idea that it's possible, from the way it sounds like this conversation played out, right? Jennifer's on the phone with her boyfriend. There's a knock noise, right? She looks through her peephole and says, "Oh, it's just my neighbor." Someone said it sounds almost like she looked through her peephole and someone was knocking on her neighbor's door, right? And she just heard that and looked, and it's like, "Oh, never mind, it's for my neighbor." That sounds like it makes sense to me too, because then, like if it's her neighbor and she's on the phone, she could have opened it up. She could have ignored it. We don't really know. We're not inside Jennifer's head, but it does seem like Wyatt would have just been brushed off and like become nothing. So I did find that kind of interesting. I think the most important thing, though, Miles, is what you said, which is that the last thing we've been able to find from Drew, as far as a quote on this, is that it sounds like this whole thing took place before she even went on the vacation. It would probably be a lot more interesting if it was the night before she went missing, which is what I think the misconception is out there, that a lot of people
Yeah.
think this mystery person knocked on her door the night before she disappeared. Who is that person? Why were they knocking? Right? Like, I get that, but it seems like that's not quite right. So,
Yeah. And listen,
yeah,
if we're wrong about this, we're gonna get a text or an email from Drew, and he's gonna set us right.
Certainly.
So,
Yeah.
and
Drew's
then
the
we
one that's
will
gonna
we will
comment.
correct it.
Yeah, Drew will
But
let us know. So yeah, that being that, I always love when people bring these kind of more, what's the word I'm looking for, esoteric theories up. These are like a little more in the weeds. Thanks for mentioning it. I think there's a gas leak. And I
yeah,
love your name. Again, if I haven't said it yet, I
yeah.
love
And
it.
thanks for being a subscriber, and thanks for continuing to watch what we're doing. Got a bunch of other stuff coming up for you guys. Like we mentioned in the beginning, we've got a special Halloween thing that we're planning, and we'll be very curious to get your guys' feedback on that. We're looking at ways that we can expand the content that we're doing without moving outside of the way that we're doing this, because we are listening to you, and we know that you guys really like the way that we're approaching the material. So keep us honest. Tell us what you guys actually think. We go outside the bounds a little bit too much, tell us, because we want to keep building this community, and we really really love having you guys here with us, and we respect uh, that you're part of this with us. So just keep us honest.
Very well said. Yeah. And the last thing I'll add is if you haven't yet and you like what we're doing, please like, please subscribe. If you know other people that are interested in this kind of thing, let them know about our channel. We're growing and we're really excited to just keep this thing going and getting to more eyeballs and more people, because we really sincerely believe not only that it's nice to have a big growing YouTube channel, but that the more people that see these cases and the more people that care and get involved, the closer we're going to move the needle to getting some answers for these. So that is the mission. And thank you for being here for it. We really appreciate you guys.
Thanks, everybody.